Today on Mourad Media, I will have the final ending to the Boston Mandela Scandal.com. This will be my last video. In the previous videos, I have exposed the U.S. corrupt judges and the Jewish Zionist developers who has robbed me of 276 units of Section 8 housing and robbed 1,500 African American and Hispanic residents of their tenant ownership and their programs, which was the American dream. Now I'm hoping in this video I will have a full disclosure to Minister Farrakhan, which he himself and Amelia Man Marsh and Reverend Bevel and Dr. Benjamin Shaver, they have supported the Mandela residents toward their tenant ownership. And they were very active on attending the demonstration that has taken place at the City Hall at that time. And you can see that on more Boston Mandela Scandal.com videos, Mourad protest from 1 to 8. And you can see the residents at the City Hall protesting the gentrification and their displacement. And the government clearly, they were in the process putting Mandela in receivership and taking it over for the gentrification of the city of Boston. And that did happen in 1996, and the property was taken away by the Jewish Zionist developers and the U.S. government in the bankruptcy court. Prior to that, I have connected with the Reverend James Bevel, which he was aiding the residents for their tenant ownership, and he has attended several of the demonstrations in Boston. And he was the liaison who invited me to meet Minister Farrakhan in Chicago, and we discussed the issue of the gentrification and what's happening to the inner cities of America toward the African American neighborhoods, how they've been gentrified, and what's happening to the last black cultures nationwide. And I was hoping Minister Farrakhan will play a role in the Mandela residents' ownership. Unfortunately, after I was put in bankruptcy, within 6 weeks, one of the ministers who sat with us on that meeting with Reverend Bevel and Dr. Benjamin Shaver and former State Senator Bill Owens and myself and other members of his staffs, discussing the Mandela tenant ownership, that minister and other one member, they were basically going through the whole developments, knocking on doors and asking the residents to support Beacon Residential property, which is Howard Cohen, he's today the owner, to support his plan and joint venture with him. And he has made a promise to the residents in the court and in the Boston Globe that within 5 years he will deed that 276 units for $1 to the Mandela residents, and he will keep their programs and the Mandela sign on the building. Clearly, the nation have favored the Jewish developer over an Arab American Middle Easterner who's been there for 15 years, challenging policy and trying to prevent crimes. I'm the only owner probably in the country who filed a class action lawsuit against the Boston police to stop the black youth from dying and to stop the gentrification. So I'm a victim for taking a stand and spent over $2 million of litigation because I believed in their cause. I believe in their genocide in the City of Americas. I saw the racism in America, and I saw the double standard in America coming from the Middle East, and I thought Minister Farrakhan and the Million Man March will be behind me in order to win this victory and leave behind the sign, that 7-letter sign spells Mandela, was named after President Nelson Mandela, the freedom fighter for South Africa. So I was quite disappointed when I was sold out during the bankruptcy procedures, and the tenants formed a partnership supposedly with the Jewish developers. And the bottom line, after they were confirmed and they achieved $12 million tax credit, which the Jewish developers not entitled to it, and the reason they were able to get the $12 million because they aligned themselves with the residents. This is one of the tactics that they used. And the government applauded both the Mandela residence and Beacon Residential Property, Howard Cohen, and the joint venture, and they said that tenant ownership now will become the reality, the dream of the tenants. None of these things have taken place. After the bankruptcy, you can look at the documents of the disclosure on the www.jewishtakeover.com. You can see how the deed was converted within 6 months into condominium. This is illegal and it's fraud. Under tax credit, you have to keep the place affordable for the term of the tax credit, which is 12 years. This is shocking. The tenants never played a part on the partnership with the Jewish developer. They never had a say. They never had management to manage their property. They were never educated how to manage and to take control of their property, and for the Jewish Zionist developers to turn it over to them after 5 years for $1 and get a credit. What they are doing for the inner city of America toward the African American residents. That would have been a huge victory. But their agenda was not about deeding the property of ownership to the African American residents, because they are about gentrification. They are about building a new annex city to Boston, downtown Boston, and to gentrify the area, displace the major last black community, put high-rise buildings, 4-star hotels, and that's their specialty. They have a real connections with HUD, Housing Urban Development, and clearly they were connected with the Internal Revenue, the IRS. Technically, they're not the legal owners even today, because the tax court did not acknowledge them as the owner. They acknowledged me as the owner, although they own the property, and today I'm bankrupt, I'm indigent, I'm homeless, and I owe $800,000 for money I never received. So the bottom line, Mr. Farrakhan, we both get screwed. And it's sad that you did not respond to my email and my package that I sent you and the videos to give you an update to what happened in the Boston Mandela scandal. And therefore, I'm going to send you the message on YouTube, what your options are. This ownership today is illegal ownership. You could go back, and since you have the Million Man March behind you, and you have the legal machinery behind you, and you have the resource, this is a case of first impression, at least was called by one of the judges. It might be the case of first impression to you and to the Million Man March to go back and reopen the Boston Mandela scandal, and to have a petition signed by hundreds of thousands of the men who marched over to Washington, D.C. for the Day of Atonement. And you could basically reopen this case and have Beacon Residential Property deed that units for $1 as they promised, get the Mandela sign back in the building, reopen all the programs, and tell the Jewish developers nationwide, you're not going to gentrify my neighborhood. Mr. Farrakhan, you lived in Roxbury for 7 years. You know about the racism in Boston. You know about the gentrification. You are a very eloquent speaker. I liked everything you have said in your videos toward the Middle East and Palestine and Gaza and the genocide, what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. But I like to think charity starts at home. And I think what's happening in the Middle East, secretly, silently, is happening right here in America. Who you think is gentrifying the neighborhoods, the African American neighborhoods, right here in the United States? So only a developer would know that, and that's why Reverend Bevel, he spent several days with me viewing over all the videos and the documentation and understanding the partnership and the mechanism of the federal government and the IRS and the judges. It takes all that machinery all the way to the White House in order for them to take over neighborhoods. It's all being given to them for $1. Tax credits being allocated is fraud, is illegal. It's not going toward tenant ownership. It's not going toward preserving the neighborhoods of affordable housing. And there is a racket of multi millions of dollars that Beacon Residential Property, Wind Management, they control HUD. They dictate to HUD what they want. They take property for $1 and they get the tax credit and they rehab it out of tax credit payers and they make a killing without $1 out of their pocket. And that's what I discussed with the deceased Reverend Bevel. He was shocked and amazed. Now he understood. And he told me that in the future, when your cases are all closed, and you should write a book and you should basically put your materials out there to the public, because this case now belongs to the citizens. It's no longer yours. And therefore, I'm done as far as legally. I don't have any recourse, except there is a judgment against me that the IRS, they are entitled to collect $800,000, which they know I don't have a penny for it. And it's amazingly the Boston Globe, they have never written about tax evasion, why I owe $800,000, why I'm not being indicted. Because if they do that, then they're going to open the Zionist Jewish developers, Beacon Residential Property, Howard Cohen. Because they had no problem taking pictures with him and the Governor Salucci and how he was going to deed the property to the residents for $1 after 5 years, and they gave him all the coverage for 5 weeks. So therefore, we both are victims to the Zionist Jewish media, to the Zionist Jewish developers, and to the Jewish lobbyists. So I'm hoping, since I did not have the pleasure to meet with you one-on-one and basically explain to what happened and what is the recourse for you to really challenge affordable housing across the nation and stop the gentrification and stop the crime. I appreciate the fact you had the Day of Atonement and the Million Man March on Washington. I think when I discussed that with the deceased Reverend Bevel, I said to him, I like it, but I would do it differently. I think the one should atone is the U.S. government. It's not the youth who committed the crime. It's how they poisoned them over generations, allowing the drugs to go into their neighborhoods and discriminate against them for jobs and education. The only trade they gave them and the only market was open for generations, in my experiences, was selling drugs. And how did the drugs get into the neighborhood? Came up in ships and planes, and there was serious bribes, millions and millions of dollars. Those youth, they were not born to be criminals. None of us born to be a criminal. So therefore, I would have combined the Day of Atonement for the U.S. government to atone, as well as the atonement of the men of the Million Man March. Look at now what happened. Clearly, after President Bush, the country has gone into a deep recession because of corruption. We're in debt, you know that, trillions of dollars. There's 40 million people on food stamps. The home foreclosures in the millions. Now, who should atone? If there's eventually, the American people will have an uprising, just like you had the Million Man March on Washington. And they will be figuring out a way to take the government back to the people, just like what's happening in Egypt, the uprising. I predict this will happen right here in America, because the corruption has gone too far for generations, for decades, robbing the taxpayers, robbing the American people, and robbing the African American neighborhood. I'm hoping in the future you would do a press conference and you would focus and reopen on Mandela and tell the world, including President Obama, who denounced you for anti-Semitic, him and Hillary Clinton, give me a break. You're the nicest man in the world. Anyone else would have really been protesting. So it's not about being anti-Semitic. When we tell the truth, we're all anti-Semitic. As Vice President Biden, you can see his video where he says, we're all Zionists. I'm a Zionist. So basically, that's what's happening in America. Zionism to me is about control and money. It's not about being anti-Semitic. I'm fair. I have many Jewish friends here and attorneys. None of the citizens, the Jewish citizens, have any knowledge of the Boston Mandela scandal. They have no idea what goes on behind the scene between those developers and HUD and the government, and how they are robbing the poor. Because clearly, if they understood this, they will protest their own, because they came from the Holocaust. So there's supposed to be compassion for minority, mainly black and Hispanics, and therefore they would not want that reputation. So what is your case? Very simple. To President Obama. Ask him what happened to the Mandela scandal. How could the tax credit be allocated for the residents, and now Beacon residential property, Howard Cohen owns it outright, 100%. Ask him what happened to the Mandela sign, that to them that depreciates the asset on Boston. It's a disgrace. Here's a freedom fighter, an honorable president of the world, and here on Boston they are ashamed of the name of Mandela to leave that sign on the side of the building, 70-foot ladder. Is that justice? They shut down the Mandela rowing team, was named after him, the first time in Boston, made history in a national magazine, all over the media. And then they shut down the Mandela Town Hall. They shut down the Mandela Citizen Research Center. My 15 years of hard work and $2 million into it all went down in vain, Mr. Farrakhan. Charity starts at home. You have all the materials. You have all the videos. You get the resources. You get the legal. You get the Million Man March behind you. God bless you, and I hope you will go ahead and reopen this one. You need a victory. America needs a victory, and you could do this for all of us. It's about corruption. It's not about pointing a finger at the Jews or the Arabs or anyone else. It's about the judges, the corrupt court in America. And your people are victimized to this. And I'm sure the deceased Reverend Bevel today is saying, thank you, Mourad. This is what I thought of you. That's why I invited you to Washington, to the Lyndon LaRouche as a guest speaker, to speak on the gentrification on housing in America and what happened to the Boston Mandela Scandal.com. I wish you luck, and God bless you.